Good morning. Happy Thursday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. That's really good too, by the way. Wow.
Okay, so I've got a question that relates to the sequencing of restoration of relative motion versus the removal of an orientation or the reduction of an orientation. So I'll paint a picture and you can tell me whether I'm on track or not, or what the issue is. So let's say we've got a narrow ISA. I am observing them doing some goblet squats with a wedge or a ramp, and we're seeing some spinal lumbar, I use the dirty word here, flexion or expansion before they're reaching sort of 90 degrees. So I look at that and I determine that that's not ideal for what we're trying to capture. So put them down on the ground and take a look at them, and they've got significant reduction in IR and ER, pretty limited. We do a couple of simple sequences to re-establish some IR. At the conclusion of that, we put them back up there. We notice that they're quite anteriorly orientated. We've managed to recapture a bit of IR. The squat goes according to plan and everything looks quite smoothly. Now, the question that I have in respect to this is that I've managed to temporarily recapture some IR. We've got an improved position in respect to the squat, but in order to really affect the sequence, from what I've sort of observed previously, you sort of say to go after the orientation prior to trying to recapture any relative motion within the hip. So I'm just trying to determine, is there a downside to just doing what I just explained to you there? And if so, what is that downside?
Well, so I have to give you the standard response, and that's a maybe, right? Because okay. What's the intention?
Well, the intention initially is to clean up that squat pattern for me.
What does that mean in regards to when you say clean it up? Is the intention, is it we're preparing them for force production? We're primarily focused on restoring relative motion, because you're going to have a reduction of relative motions if the intention is to increase force production, right? And so under that circumstance, you might have been doing something that's very useful in regards to restoring relative motions, maybe not.
Okay, so
if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so if you do an activity that restores internal rotation and it does not have an impact on external rotation in a favorable way, okay, then there's a good chance that you created an orientation, okay, which might be useful in force production. However, it would interfere potentially with relative motion.
So for someone that, say, for instance, in that circumstance, someone who's got an anterior orientation, we could have, in actual fact, exacerbated the anterior orientation by going after more R.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
and that's why, when you say clean up a squat pattern, it's like that's sort of like this cloudy kind of a representation, because you probably understand exactly what you meant to say, right?
Yeah.
Because you knew what your intention was, and then I have to sit way over here on the other side of the other hemisphere, and I have to go, okay, what did Matt mean by that? And then figure that out. And so that's why we have to be a little bit more clear as to what our intentions are at the beginning of this, right?
So in that example there, the clearing up of the squat pattern was me observing that lumbar flexion, if you like, midway, and then that not being present after we executed that restoration of a little bit of internal.
So you took out your microscope and you went like this, and you looked right at the lower back, right?
That was it.
Okay. Yeah. Here's my next question.
Okay.
What else had to happen to accomplish the outcome?
All
Do you
right.
think that you only impacted that area?
No, likely
And
not.
I'm not saying you did anything. I want to be clear. I'm not saying you did anything wrong. I'm just saying it's like, do you think that you just impacted that one area?
No, well, no, of course not. So the question would be, the question I guess would be, as just thinking this through, if I've reduced that lumbar, I don't want to use the word flexion.
It's okay. It's all right. It's like I speak dirty words too, but
Okay.
I just don't use them when I don't want to, right? Basically.
Okay. So
No, it's like I understand where you're going. So you're looking at it. You initially were seeing an ER compensatory strategy. Okay.
Yep.
That's what that was. By your description, that's what that was. Okay. You did something and you made a change. So here's my question to you, Matt Hamilton. It looked different. It was more favorable in your eyes.
Yep.
But if you took that ER compensatory strategy and just put it somewhere else, is that the correct answer? And again, I'm not judging that, because I might be totally okay with that, because what may have had to happen though is that you saw more ER orientation in the hip itself, and then by doing that, you made the lower back look different. That might be a great solution for somebody that has to produce force. So think about like a power lifter trying to squat with a narrow stance when they've never squatted with a narrow stance. That's kind of what you were describing. And then you put them in a wide stance with some toe out, and then you see a totally different representation of the squat. And maybe their force output goes up, which would be totally favorable in that circumstance.
Okay, so the flow on from this would be, in respect to, say, reducing the anterior orientation that we're seeing of the pelvis itself as a whole. If you go after that, what sort of, like, in anything that I've done up to this point where we might be using things like that Hill's elevated goblet squat, for instance, or some cross connects or anything of that nature, trying to get someone back into an earlier representation, right? The issue that I'm seeing is, are you, like, from a visual observation, to reduce that seems to be a very, in my eyes anyway, up to this point, a long, drawn-out process. Do you just use like your ER measures as your KPIs in respect to that reduction?
Yeah, so it's a very useful measure. Now, so here's what we have to be clear about when we're talking about reducing the anterior orientation. Is what we want to see is a restoration, excuse me, of relative motion. Because if you're anteriorly oriented, the pelvis is moving as one big piece, right? So instead of having these segmental representations, it's moving as an entire unit. And that's why you start to see the measures that you do. So when I say, using your ER as a KPI, what we want to see is an improvement in the ER. That's a reduction in the orientation. But I also want to see the superimposition of internal rotation at the same time, because if I don't, then I know I'm back to square one with what you were observing initially in the squat, which was the compensation in the lower back.
Right.
So a bunch of ER, no IR. Yeah, I got the pelvis to go in the other direction, but I didn't do it with relative motions. I did it through the spine.
Okay.
When I say relative motions, it's relative motions in the pelvis itself.
In the pelvis, yeah.